Dragons were never just weapons in Game of Thrones. That's the lie the show tells you first, and the lie most people never stop believing. Dragons are framed as nuclear options with wings, flying flamethrowers, magical WMDs that turn the tide of wars and melt castles like cheap plastic. And sure, on the surface that's what they are. But if you pay attention to how the world reacts to dragons, not just characters, but reality itself, a much stranger picture starts to form. Because dragons don't behave like animals. They don't behave like tools. They don't even behave like magic creatures. They behave like gods, not the all-knowing, all-loving kind. The old kind. The kind that demand worship, reshape history by existing, and vanish when belief fades. And once you start watching Game of Thrones through that lens, everything clicks into place. The prophecies, the blood magic, the rise and fall of empires, and especially the ending that left everyone staring at their screens like, wait, was that it? Let's start with something obvious that somehow gets ignored. Dragons don't obey anyone who hasn't been chosen. Plenty of people try to control dragons. Almost all of them fail, spectacularly. Burned alive, eaten, or reduced to a cautionary tale told by people who like having skin. The Targaryens didn't train dragons the way you train horses. They bonded with them. And even then, that bond was never guaranteed. Which is weird, right? If dragons were just animals, bloodlines wouldn't matter this much. If they were just weapons, anyone with enough guts and chains could use them. But that's not how it works. Dragons respond to specific people, at specific times, in specific moments of history, almost like they're choosing avatars. Sound familiar? That's because dragons operate less like pets and more like divine manifestations. They show up when the world reaches a breaking point. When the old order is too stagnant to survive. When humanity needs to be reminded that it is very, very small. And when they disappear, magic fades with them. That's not coincidence. That's theology. Look at the timeline. Dragons thrive when magic is strong. They weaken when magic fades. After the last dragons die out, the world becomes smaller, duller, and more grounded. Prophecies still exist, but they're quieter. Miracles become rumors. Gods retreat into symbols and stories. Then Daenerys walks into a fire. And the gods return. Her dragons aren't just reborn creatures. They're a religious event. The world reacts accordingly. Red priests suddenly get louder. Prophecies reignite. People start seeing signs everywhere. Fire magic works better. The dead refuse to stay dead. You don't get that kind of ripple effect from a big lizard. You get it from something fundamental re-entering the world. Now let's talk about worship, because the show is sneaky about this. Nobody kneels to dragons the way they kneel to kings, but they behave exactly the same way. Fear, reverence, sacrifice. Entire cities surrender without a fight the moment a dragon shows up overhead. Not because they're being strategic, because they believe resistance is pointless. That's religion. Even Daenerys' followers don't really follow her. They follow what she represents. Breaker of chains, mother of dragons. Titles that sound less like political offices and more like mythological roles. Her authority doesn't come from law. It comes from proximity to the divine. And the moment she loses that proximity, when one dragon dies, then another, her grip on reality starts to slip. Not just politically, but emotionally. Because gods don't share power well. And mortals who borrow it tend to fall apart when it's taken away. Now consider this. Every major civilization in Westeros mythology ties its greatest moments to dragons. Valyria? Dragon gods. Targaryen conquest? Dragon gods. The Doom? Dragons gone wrong. The fall of magic? Dragons are extinct. Dragons aren't part of history. History bends around them, which brings us to fire and blood. The Targaryen motto that everyone treats like edgy branding. But it's not a slogan, it's a doctrine. Fire is purification, blood is sacrifice. That's not politics. That's ritual language. The Targaryens didn't rule because they were better rulers. They ruled because they were the high priests of a god that breathed fire. And when they lost that god, they collapsed like every theocracy ever has. That's why Robert's rebellion works. Not because Robert was special, but because the dragons were gone. You can't overthrow gods. but you can overthrow priests once the altar is empty, until the gods come back. Now let's talk about the Night King, because this theory only works if ice has a god too. And it does. The Night King isn't just a villain. He's an opposing force of divinity. Ice, death, stillness, memory erased. If dragons are gods of change, chaos, and rebirth through destruction, the Night King is a god of preservation through annihilation. No stories, no cycles, no rebirth, just silence. That's why dragons are his true enemy. Not armies, not swords, not heroes. Only dragonfire can permanently destroy his creations. Because divine power cancels divine power. And notice how the show frames the long night. It's not treated like a war. It's treated like an apocalypse myth. Darkness swallowing the world. Light barely holding on. Sacrifice required. A god must fall. Arya killing the Night King isn't just a plot twist, it's a theological statement. Gods can be killed, but only under very specific conditions, by someone who exists outside normal systems of power, which brings us to the ending. Because this theory doesn't stop at dragons or gods. It explains why the ending feels the way it does. When Daenerys burns King's Landing, people debate morality, pacing, and character arcs. But zoom out. What's actually happening is a god overstaying its welcome. Fire without balance, purification without restraint. This isn't a queen losing control. This is divinity without limits, acting exactly the way unchecked gods always do in mythology. And what happens next? The last dragon leaves. Drogon doesn't attack Jon. He doesn't burn the Unsullied. He doesn't conquer Westeros. He melts the throne, the symbol of human power that tried to contain divine force, and then he flies away. God exits the stage. Magic recedes. The world stabilizes. Politics return. Compromises replace prophecy. A king is chosen not by fire or blood, but by consensus. Boring, fragile human consensus. That's not bad writing. That's an age ending. Is left to clean up the mess. Bran becoming king fits this perfectly. He's not divine. He's not chosen by dragons. He's chosen because he remembers. In a godless world, memory replaces miracle. Records replace prophecy. Knowledge replaces fire. The age of gods ends. The age of men begins. Again. And here's the part that quietly ties all the theories together. If dragons are gods, then their return wasn't salvation. It was a test. Can humanity handle divine power without becoming monstrous? Can rulers wield godhood and stay human? Can the world break its cycles when the gods show up again? And the answer, consistently, is no. The dragons didn't save the world, they revealed it. They exposed how fragile morality becomes when power feels absolute. How fast liberation turns into domination. How quickly worship replaces accountability. Which is why the gods leave. Every time. So when people say they wanted more dragons at the end, or that the show lost something when they were gone, they're not wrong emotionally, but they're missing the point thematically. You're not supposed to feel satisfied. You're supposed to feel the absence. Because gods are exciting, and terrifying, and unsustainable. And Game of Thrones was never about cheering for gods. It was about watching what happens when humans mistake them for solutions. So the next time you re-watch the series, pay attention to when dragons appear, and when they don't. Watch how the world behaves around them. Notice how belief spreads faster than fire. And ask yourself one uncomfortable question. If dragons really were gods, were we ever meant to root for them? And if not, what other answers in this story were really just divine distractions, waiting to burn out and disappear?